Welcome to the HMO Property Show by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. Today I've got another very special guest. Lots of people still asking me questions about the NDIS and special disability accommodation. So I brought in potentially the most knowledgeable person in this space, sometimes referred to as the SDA fairy godmother. It's Miss Alison McLeod. Alison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Neil. And really, well, what can I say after that? I do say, when I hear that fairy godmother tag, I always say I'm glad it's godmother and not grandmother.
So myself and Alison met at the SDA conference in Western Australia. When was that? 3-4 months ago?
Yes, a couple of months ago.
Yeah. And Alison is from INHAB Australia. They are SDA providers, property management team, and heavy on the advisory side as well. Is that right, Alison?
That's correct. Yeah. So we do the bespoke property management required for SDA tenancies. We don't own any stock ourselves, so we're just managing on behalf of investors. And we have participants coming to us looking for fit for purpose accom. We place them in the, match them with where they would like to live, etc. Take out the governance piece. And then to the side, because my background's strongly in property, finance and risk, we also find ourselves advising to a lot of developers, financiers, builders, investors who want to get involved in the space about how to get in. Yeah.
I think the extra sort of special thing with you is you've been involved in this from the very start. Is that right?
Close to the start.
Close to the start. Yeah.
I live in Geelong, Neil, and the NDIA is headquartered in Geelong. So in Victoria, Geelong's a little bit unique in that we have the NDIA, the Transport Accident Commission, and Work Cover or WorkSafe. So we have the three social insurances, the two state social insurance bodies and the federal one headquartered here. So the accessible piece has become really strong and something that gets talked about a lot here. And so I think the NDIA fully rolled out in 2016, and I started doing some project work for them mid to late 2018, specifically around SDA design standard and helping set up that policy. So, yeah.
And what made them reach out to you, Alison?
I was a founding director of what's the Optian valuation business now. So, and I left there in the start of 2017, end of 16, and sold down my shareholding. But I was reasonably well networked throughout the Geelong business community. And because we have those social insurance businesses here, you'd sit around boardroom tables and boardroom briefings, etc., on this and that, talking about how Geelong's a social insurance hub. And the disability sector would say, Geelong's actually kidding itself because you've got bluestone curbing and channeling everywhere. It's not accessible. So I started to lean into some of those conversations, and I obviously asked a few questions and maybe a few too many questions. And that's where I was asked if I'd like to assist the NDIA with the build out of their SDA policy and what they were going to do for accommodation. Yeah, so that's the segue really.
And when you were brought in to advise on that, was there big changes from what it was to what it is now based on some of the feedback that you've given them?
I think in 2016, when SDA originally started, the standards for SDA were based on the livable housing silver and platinum specifications. And those species are great. They're designed for people aging in place. They're not designed for disability. So those standards were, so for silver, there was silver plus 3 or 4 extras for improved livability or robust. And for high physical support and FA, there was platinum plus a few things. So it worked to start with, but the base was not coming from disability. It was coming from aging in place, which is different. So coming in and doing that, working on that design specification, we've actually got together specifications for residential disability, which is a first in Australia, and we're, at the time we were led to believe it was probably world leading. The other piece about it was when I suppose I stepped into the space, the NDIA were looking, going, how we've got to get this sector activated. And the way it was working at the moment was, Neil, you go away and build platinum and put those 3 things in, 3 or 4 extra things in, and then come to us and we'll tell you whether or not we'll enrol it. So they were expecting you to take a huge risk financially, etc., and not have any certainty. So I've walked in and gone, well, the development sector and the property sector, we need clarity and we need certainty. So clarity was the design standard to get that up, and certainty was to put the plan stage certification in place for SDA, and then as well as the on completion. So now, Neil, you can go away, get your plans drawn in accordance with the specifications, take them to an assessor, and they will say, yes, Neil, if you go away and build exactly that, we will come out and look when you're finished, and as long as you've built what you said you'd build, we will recommend it be enrolled at this level. That sort of certainty didn't exist. The clarity about what to build and the certainty about what you would have at the end wasn't there. That's what we brought in with that.
So it's kind of like private certification pre-construction.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
So that's one part of it then, but we still, if you build it to that standard, the missing piece, or the most important piece, is the participants that live in these houses as well, isn't it?
That's correct. So when I was, as I said, working on the standards, etc., and looking at it, going that, and coming from the property and risk background, the missing piece is we can build as much of what we like and have certificates saying that we'll enrol at this. Unless we've got occupancy, we've got nothing. We haven't got a return at all. So the participant piece is vitally important, and it's also time consuming to navigate. So if we're looking from start, probably the best results are seen where you start with a specific participant in mind and work, and that's the participant-centred approach, and work out from there, designing to a category and fitting with their specific needs. If we do everything at that, we're never going to get there, because we've got to actually get this to scale as well. So that's why those 4 design categories are a really good starting point. So get started, be finding your participants who want this to be their long-term housing outcome, and probably be flexible in bespoking it for their specific needs as you go through once you've identified them. Once you have identified who's going to be living there. But that identification piece isn't easy. You need to find somebody who wants to live in that area, wants to live in the style of accommodation you're looking to build, has the level of funding in their plan that as a landlord you will accept, or as a property investor you will accept. And depending on what their funding decision is out of the NDIS, whether or not they need housemates or flatmates that are compatible. So there's lots of steps to go through there. And then when you get all that ticked off, we still can't move somebody in unless the risks associated with them have been mitigated. So for example, somebody who needs an automatic door opener can't move in there safely until that automatic door opener has been fixed to the door and working. So if you're waiting to get that money in their plan from the assistive technology budget, you could be waiting another 3 or 4 months. You've got your bricks and mortar sitting empty while you're waiting for that to be approved, etc. So there's a lot of ducks to line up, and to get them all to run in a straight line and finish at the same time is a challenge.
There's a lot of work involved, isn't there? Which is that the reason that the government incentivise investors with such a high yield on these assets?
In my opinion, the government can't afford to maintain the public or social housing stock that they have at the moment, which is mainstream, or the disability stock that they hold among that, much less develop what we need as demand is growing. So they've incentivised the private sector to come along and deliver the stock themselves via the price points in the price guide. you'll read lots of stories about the NDIS costs going through the roof. I personally don't think that's our bricks and mortar piece. That's associated with lots of other areas in the scheme, such as care, outings, respite, transport, allied health. There's lots of moving parts that participants need to be able to access, and there's huge rising costs in all of those. The SDA portion of it, at 700 million at full rollout, which is only halfway there now, is by far the smallest segment. To us as property people, it's really good return, but it's not the piece that's growing exponentially. There.
And I think that's important to note as well, because a lot of the people I speak to as property investors probably do not see all of the other components that make up the NDIS. So the NDIS is just one of 25 pieces potentially.
Correct. So SDA is just one of, So participants are funded for SDA because they've been assessed as not being able to live safely in mainstream bricks and mortar. So there's specific design requirements that need to be in place. So people have complex lives, and it's not just about the SDA is a hugely important piece. If we can get the home and living circumstances right for people, then they can go on and live their best lives. But it's not just about the key in the door. There's so much more to it. And even things like the carers suite, etc. The fact that you can have a carer stay in there overnight and be on call for if you need them, or the fact that you can have someone stay in there with you and be awake all night to observe if you need them and perhaps don't realise you need them, etc. Lots of moving parts, and that's why it's such a rewarding. When we get it right, it is so rewarding, Neil.
Yes.
So very rewarding.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about, can you take us through the different levels of care that people get and what the difference in the SDA needs to be to match that level of care?
So, can I reframe that question? Okay, so let's run through the different design categories of specialist disability accommodation, and then from there we'll flow through to talking about care a bit more if we could. So there's 4 categories that we build to, and I usually think in terms of 3 categories and then the 4th category separately. So if I start with the 3 categories, improved livability, fully accessible and high physical support, participants who are generally funded for improved livability SDA will quite often have cognitive or intellectual impairments and need somebody to be with them for cooking, weather appropriate clothing, medication management, just basically knowing someone there, making sure that risk to self is minimised. If fully accessible, participants who are funded at fully accessible may be on a 4-wheelie walker or progressing towards a wheelchair. So you think about larger circulation space, wider doorways, movable bench top heights, etc., so they can wheel under or get their wheelie walker to it and use their sink and their benches. And then participants who are funded at high physical support level are usually all those things, plus they need help. They need help with hoistings, with transferring. They can't self-transfer, so predominant difference there is the hoisting piece. The 4th category, which I put out to the side, is the category they call robust, where participants are at risk of potential harm to themselves, harm to other people, or property damage. So the differences in construction there are the hardness of finishes, the toughened glass, the non-ligature fittings, a variety of things that are there. In terms of care across those 4 categories, as I said, the improved livability participants, it's usually a supervisory piece, and perhaps to help them set their shower temperature, those sorts of things. Fully accessible participants may or may not need that supervisory piece, but they may need people to coming in at different times of the day, helping them with different general activities of daily living, tasks and things they need to go about doing. and they may or may not need someone there overnight with them as well. And participants at the high physical support level who can't self-transfer usually need assistance there most of the time to enable them to go from their bed into their wheelchair or into their shower commode, etc., to then get themselves set up for their activities of daily living and to assist them with that. If we step back over to the robust piece, what we see most of is participants who just need to make sure that someone's with them so they're safe and the people around them are safe. So again, a supervisory sort of a role, and making sure their behaviours that there's fundamentals in place to ensure that their behaviours of concern can moderate, or that they can be encouraged to self-regulate, etc. So, you know, sensory spaces, or just working with people to calm their distress or their duress that they're going through at that particular point in time, which is as a result of their disability. So it's about, again, having someone with them most of the time, but perhaps not to assist them to shower, etc., but to make sure they do it and that they're safe in doing that.
Okay. And the carers that we're talking about here as well, do they live in the house full time, or is this a sort of shift pattern that different carers would work?
There's a variety of answers to that, and really every individual participant's unique in the care level they require. So when we design the bricks and mortar, we strongly encourage you to include what we call a carer's suite in there. So, and the NDIA pay for the fact that on-site overnight accommodation, OOA, or brackets the carer's suite, is included, whether it's used by a carer or not. So for building the bricks and mortar, you're paid to have it there. Having it there means that we can have a carer stay overnight if somebody needs someone there on what they call inactive support. So if they have a bit of trouble during the night, they can press a buzzer or wake someone up who's in the carer suite who goes in to assist. If somebody requires line of sight over them 24/7, they can still have the carer suite to be there to shower, etc., but they would not necessarily sleep. They would be rostered to be what we call an awake shift rather than an inactive shift. So the difference is in the care price per hour that they're paid. But as I said, I'd strongly encourage you always to have that carer suite there, because that just works, will work to the full functionality of your asset. We don't always know who's going to be living there. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer. We have a lady moving in to a one participant plus carer suite villa who her prognosis is that her disability will continue, the needs will continue to increase. But at the moment, she can do a lot of things for herself, and she has the drop-in supports rather than the stay overnight supports. She uses the second bedroom. She's looking forward to using it for her grandchildren to stay a night a week here and there until she actually needs the carer in with her full time. So the short answer is, how long's a piece of string, really?
Well, the beauty about the detail and the answers that you've given there is people can now start to understand the complexity in this scheme, and the amount of moving parts that's in there. I mean, like, we are essentially providing the bricks and mortar as property developers, but there's so much else that's going on, and it's not as straightforward as just finding a tenant for a house. How do people get the funding or get the approved funding to live in these properties?
Okay, so when the Productivity Commission first did their modelling for the NDIS, they estimated that 6% of participants cannot live safely and have their disability supports provided safely in mainstream bricks and mortar. So that was where specialist disability accommodation came about from. And I've lost the track of your question, Neil. Help me.
It was, how do people get access to the funding, and how do they get assessed and then get the funding for that level of care?
How do they get the funding in their plan? So if we think of 100% of participants, and then we come down to the 6% who are likely to be eligible, if people wanting SDA funding in their plan who are participants in the NDIS need to submit an application to what's called the Home and Living Panel, and you need evidence to support what you're applying for. So one of the most critical pieces of evidence that participants need to submit with their application is a functional assessment from an occupational therapist. So the occupational therapist goes in and works with the participant, writes a report about what they can do and what they need assistance to do and what they need purpose-built bricks and mortar to help them do. So that's sort of the foundation document for applying, or the supporting document for applying for and assessing, helping the agency work out which level of funding, whether it's FA, IL, HBS or robust, that will be most appropriate. If, for example, your response is most probably going to be needing robust accommodation, there's things like behaviour support plans, incident reports, etc. All those things that also go into evidence-based the decision. Your application gets put in, and there's two steps of decision making under the NDIS Act. The first one is the participant eligible for SDA funding. Now, to be considered eligible, they need to demonstrate and evidence that they have extreme functional impairment and or very high support needs.
Right.
So if they can evidence either or both with the evidence-based report that's gone in, that gets them through stage one. Stage two is then looking at those, okay, person A is eligible. What level of funding are we going to put in out of those four categories? So the next step that the Home and Living Panel look at and go, okay, is participant A, do they need improved livability, HPS, robust? And the evidence-based directs that. The next question then is, do they live by themselves or with how many other people? So there's sort of three stages to get the right level of funding. So you'll hear someone come out and say, I have fully accessible funding to live with 2 other people in X location. The location factor is the easy one that to get changed and get shifted around. But the first tick is being eligible. And then the second piece is at what category and how many people to live with. So,
am I right in hearing that you said only 6% of people that apply for funding are approved?
What I said was 6% of NDIS participants are likely to be eligible for SDA.
Right.
So I think we have about, early estimates, 2016 when the Productivity Commission did their work, they estimated that we would have 460,000 people, participants of the NDIS at full scheme. We've blown those numbers out of the water already. It's up to about 530, 540,000 now. But they said 460,000, and they said of that 460,000, 6.1% are likely to be eligible for SDA, which was 28,000 people. So that's where that 28,000 participants for SDA number has come from. If it keeps going up, if that 6.1% holds, and it's 6.1% of total participants, it is ratcheting up at a great rate. Whether that 6.1% holds or not is the magic question.
So what happens to the other 94% of NDIS participants that may need access to housing that didn't get it in their plan?
So they're left with mainstream housing options, and we all know what's happening with mainstream housing options in Australia at the moment and how it's just been ignored for so long and the pressure's on. So if we're speaking to predominantly property developers on this podcast at the moment, or whoever's listening, whatever you're building, just think accessibility for general ageing in place and what's tagged the other 94%. So they're people who live with a disability, but it's not deemed significant enough that they need purpose-built bricks and mortar. But they do still need somewhere safe to call home.
Yes, everybody does. Everybody does. So do we build these to, when you go back to the LHA guideline, do we build these to silver spec so they've got universal access and disability bathroom?
I think that would be the minimum that would be the society would be hoping that you do, Neil. And again, we've got this ageing population, which with the baby boomers are heading through, and then the next lot. we haven't got enough rooms in resi aged care, etc., for everybody to go. So that's what this ageing in place is so critical. And you've got me on my hobby horse now, because while I'm at the moment working as a SME person in the disability space, the whole housing affordability continuum and housing people appropriately is probably my strongest passion. Yeah, just do it well up front and encourage people to be at home for as long as they can. I mean, I'm certainly not looking forward to going to live in a room in a resi aged care facility at some stage. If I can design something so I can stay at home for as long as possible, that would be ideal for me. And I think probably most Australians tend to think along those lines. So, yeah, step-free thresholds, just good quality design in there.
And without getting sidetracked too far from SDA, the population is aging now, and we've got the aging population which are now downsizing or upsizing if you're talking about lifestyle. So the marketplace for this style of accommodation or properties built to that specification is probably bigger than we think, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and growing, bigger and growing. So the National Construction Code is starting to recognise it with a few tweaks that have been made in there. But I think it's just the right way for us to go as a property sector anyway, to think about it. And again, without sidetracking too much, we might need to have another conversation about accessible tourism and the potential growth in that, etc. as well. So, you know, whatever you're doing and wherever you're doing it, think about accessibility in what you're doing, because the options are broadening every day.
So of the 6% of NDIS people that have got access to SDA, do we know the split of who has IL, who has FA and who has HPS? And do we know what style of SDA we should be building to meet the market?
It's a great question, and let's take it in the reverse order. From day one, I have said that I believe this sector will mimic mainstream fundamentals. So anything that's well located, close to social and economic infrastructure and possibilities, will be stock that gets let faster than stuff that's out in greenfields, nowhere near public transport or anything. Same thing. Some people like to live in apartments. Some people like to live in villa units. Some people like to live in houses. Some people like to live on slightly larger lots. Some people like to live on micro lots. A person with a disability is no different in their thought process around that to you and I, Neil. So the diversity of stock needs to nearly mimic or mirror the mainstream diversity of stock. The piece where you perhaps have to be careful in the SDA space around is the design around leveraging costs of care over, so maybe 3 or 4. Quite often, still providers will talk about, say, 3 houses within 3 kilometres. So that enables them to work their rosters of care, so their carers can go from house one to the other, or there's their additional supports in for 2 hours here, 2 hours at the next house, and 2 hours at the next house to get their shifts right, etc. So whilst I say mimic mainstream, it's also thinking about economies across the care provider piece that needs to come in. And heading back to which category has the most demand, the latest figures that I've seen put IL running at around 52% of those participants. And the figures were quoted at the NDIS seminar that we met at, Neil, where 52% didn't have mobility issues, but they had intellectual and cognitive impairment issues, which would point them towards the IL or the robust piece, rather than needing the larger circulation space and the hoisting, etc. So yeah, over 52% in that IL/robust space. And I don't know the breakdown between the IL and the robust. The data is still emerging. I won't say the data's rubbery, that's what it probably was, but it's emerging. You've got to remember, this is a huge transformation from what was a welfare sector to now a social insurance piece. Every state and territory jurisdiction held their data in a different way, in a spreadsheet, in a filing cabinet, in some notes on someone's top drawer, not at all, or in a manila folder under someone's desk.
Yeah.
So to compile all that and to get numbers across Australia is a challenge. Every year the NDIS scheme actuary are getting better at it, but it's got to all be compiled and put together. So as I said, it's gone from rubbery to emerging in my description.
That was going to be my next question, like how accurate is that data? Because as a property developer, we obviously want to build to meet the market.
Yeah.
But if the data is not as accurate as need be, it makes it a little bit difficult again. And when we go back to the start of the podcast where you said like one piece is the participants and one piece is the housing. If we get the housing right, then we can get the participants right and make the space right for that person. But if the data isn't as accurate as we need, it still makes it a little bit difficult, doesn't it?
It does. But if you also then draw through what I said about mainstream fundamentals, so if you build a 2-bedroom villa in South Yarra in Melbourne, and you build a 2-bedroom villa in Greenfields in the outer western suburbs, and you say to people for the same money, effectively, which one would you live in? I think every day of the week you're probably going to get the South Yarra one taken up. So it comes back to location, close to social and economic activity, etc. So close to health facilities, etc. All the things we talked about before. In terms of where we're at the moment, I have a phrase that I use called the hidden people with disability. So Australians have been a very proud country of people for many years, and I look back on growing up and my childhood community, and now I look back and I think, okay, they had someone with a disability, that family had someone with a disability. People cared for their own at home, and I think there's probably still a bit of that going on in Australia as well. So at the moment, I don't, even if they put the numbers together of who we've got living where at the moment, I still think there's more to come. Some of the saddest phone calls I get are on a Friday afternoon where someone will ring me in a panic saying, Johnny's 63 and we need somewhere for him to live immediately. He's lived all his life with mum and she's 85 and just had a fall and broken her hip, and she's gone into hospital and she'll never come home again. We need to find somewhere for Johnny to live. Now, what sort of a life have we, as a society, have we created for that woman who's cared for Johnny all life? And I know she wouldn't do it any other way. But Johnny at 63, all of a sudden, his life's turned upside down. Mum's never coming home. I think there is a lot of that hidden participants still cared for at home in some ways. So rubbery emerging, we're away before we're getting, fully accurate. So you guys coming back to you saying to me where to build and what to build well and build good stock, well located, and people will want to live there. Correct, absolutely correct. Good stock, and I come back to my property background, build stuff that's not going to be obsolete in 5 years. Don't build to minimum. When we drew up that design standard, we were somewhat limited in what we could put into it because pricing wasn't changing. So the standards that we introduced had to fit within the existing pricing, which is all under review at the moment. But so in that document, we put best practice at the back. So you could build to the document and get through. My recommendation would be to look at best practice and implement that, because generally that will be sort of phase 2 of where the direction will be. I would also encourage you to talk to participants, care providers, SDA providers, etc., about what they're seeing as leading edge in it. And if I give you an example, a learning from COVID, we talk to our developers now about putting a second set of laundry facilities in, because if we've learned anything from COVID, it's about biohazards and sterilisation and cleanliness, etc. So if you, and it might even just be a gastro outbreak, but if you can if you can separate the linen that's come out of the room where the biohazard or the disease, the illness is, from the day-to-day washing, etc., that has got to be a help. So it's just trying to think of some of those tweaks ahead, and yeah, staying updated with it. So keep yourselves at conferences, keep yourselves looking and listening about what's emerging in the marketplace for good stock, and as I said, engage with quality SDA providers. We'll help you with design kits. If I think of a sill provider who called me and said, Alison, when you get something built for us, we want a small kitchenette in the carer's facility. We want a bar fridge, we want a sink with hot and cold running water, and we want the ability to boil a kettle and for our staff to be able to sit down and eat their sandwiches. Now, the piece around the fridge was the carers were getting to lunchtime, going to the fridge in the kitchen to get their lunch, and someone had eaten it. Now, and usually the story was it actually wasn't a participant who'd eaten it. It was a visitor. It was a participant's visitor who thought it was the house fridge. So it's a day-to-day fridge. So someone turns up at your house, Neil, and feels like having a ham sandwich, and they open the fridge and there's one. They've taken it off and they've eaten it. So here's a carer on a lengthy shift, goes to get their lunch, gone. So it's about these houses are people's homes. They also need to operate as someone else's workplace. So it's about getting that balance right.
Something else that you touched on there, Alison, as well, when you were saying the fundamentals for SDA, the fundamentals for normal residential property, for instance, are the same. So we're looking for infrastructure, transport, shops, amenity. And then you mentioned like South Yarra compared to West Melbourne, for instance. The problem that we're seeing with infill SDA is site selection, finding sites big enough and flat enough, which are at a price point that we can develop this product to the price point that we need to and still make a return that's attractive for us to then go again and build more properties. Is that a common problem that we're seeing across the country?
Absolutely, Neil, absolutely. So we're seeing the location factors and the land prices, whilst they're indexed, but they were set at 2016 levels. We know what's happened between 2016 and 2023 to land prices. We also have the NDIA, the pricing initially priced one participant, one bedroom, or one participant, two bedroom apartments at the highest rate of return, which had everyone in the property sector crunching their Excel spreadsheets and running straight to that, because that's what that was the trigger that was used. We are now finding that those levels of approvals to live by yourself aren't coming through the home and living panel at the rate that the supply's finishing. So we've got a disconnect there. And part of the reasoning around that is also the cost of care, to care for a person in an apartment by themselves versus someone sharing with two others in a house. So there's no easy answer, but if you're looking to build in the strong metro areas, you can't find a house site to build on because it's price prohibitive. So the only way we're going to get people housed in those areas is through apartment living. So we also need to be getting the agency to be looking at how they put that level of funding, or the level of funding that will allow the medium density stock to continue to be developed, so we can get people occupied. And it's the same thing that's happening across the economy for housing in general, but on a micro level in SDA. So yes, the only way we're going to get people housed in Sydney and Melbourne and some other areas as well is if we move to medium density. And to move to medium density, we've got to look at apartments, and if that apartment level of funding has to be, we have to have more apartment level of funding in people's plans to get developers to do it.
Yeah. And am I right in here you say, due to the previous pricing guideline of what rental would be achieved in the different style of accommodation that we can provide, it skewed it so that it made it look like we wanted more apartments, is that right?
Correct. So I think I just remember some stats, and I'm talking off the top of my head here, but it was around $125,000 a year SDA funding for a one-bedroom, one-participant apartment in suburban Melbourne. Now, every day of the week, you're going to go out and build as many of those as you can and to get that return. But now we're not getting the participants through the scheme with that level of funding in their plan because it is an exorbitant amount of money to put in to have that provided. So the results of this pricing review, which is currently underway, we're all sitting on the edge of our seats waiting for it to come through, Neil. But same thing, the bureaucratic system wonders why everyone ran out and built one-bedroom apartments. It was because that's where the price signal sent everyone to.
Correct. So were we seeing apartments being built in the fringe suburbs as well, just because people obviously thought that's what was required?
Yes, we were. Yep. And when you say people thought that's what was required, it's where people who are wanting to get involved in this space need to take a deep breath and take a step back, because there is reward for effort in this in returns, but it is not easy. So instead of just going, oh, we think that's what's required, that's what we need to go and do, go and have the conversations, go and listen, educate yourself, find out what actually is required, because this build it and they will come is not necessarily how it works. Not everyone wants to live by themselves. So you talk to participants who've been in some of the high rises where developers have gone in and taken 10+1 and run that concierge model. It can be very lonely and isolating if you're living in there by yourself, your carer leaves. Yes, you might have a call button, but once that door shuts, you're in your apartment by yourself. That's not everybody's idea of how they would like to live either. So, yeah.
So in regards to floor plans and the amount of bedrooms in an SDA, we're seeing, typically one bedroom for robust, then we're seeing anywhere between 2 and 4 for HPS, same for FA, and then 2 to 4 for IL as well. Is that correct?
So what we're seeing most of for robust is one participant plus OOA. We're actually hearing mutterings out of the price review. It's Chinese whispers everywhere, but we're hearing that an ideal design coming forward might be actually 2 participants plus OOA, but nearly 2 wings. So think about giving each participant their end of the villa with perhaps a small little sitting room and the shared common area. So we might be getting back to more 2 participants. Until we see it, we don't know, but that's what we're hearing. My advice, or the advice that comes out of INHAB Australia, would be no more than 3 participants under a roof line for any, and certainly no more than 2 for robust. And actually we prefer 1, but we've got to watch where this pricing goes as well. But it's hard enough to find 2 other people to live with someone. And I know at my age, I'm living by myself. You want to tell me to go and find 2 people that'll live with grumpy old Alison? Not hard. It's going to be hard to do. So the days of the 4 and 5, I don't think that's appropriate. And most of the funding decisions are 3 or less. So the funding and the plans should enable someone to live with, at worst, 2 others. The HPS FAs, ILs, up to 3 for any of those categories should be fine. If you have a site and some of our developers are looking at 4 being the optimum number of participants on a site. So we're seeing some stuff around a 3 participant house plus OOA and a 1 participant villa plus OOA on the same site, because that gives the carers can leverage some cost of care between both dwellings there. Or you might do a 2 and a 2 rather than a 3 and a 1, or you might do a 3 and a 2 to get 5. So but not all. So not everybody. You don't have to get on with 4 other people is the thing, or you want a bit of space yourself.
So in the space that you're in as an SDA provider in the property management space, are you seeing a certain type of house harder to fill than others? Is a two-bedder easy to fill than a four-bedder? A four-bedder is always getting filled.
We're seeing three-bedders are reasonably okay to fill. As the sector's still developing, we're still seeing stuff come through without fire sprinklers. So are we going to put 3 high physical participants in a smallish house without fire sprinklers, where there's only one living area, where there's not going to be enough room for, you go in, the furniture's been styled, there's a beautiful couch, there's a beautiful coffee table, where are we going to fit 3 high-powered wheelchairs in there? It's just not going to happen. So some of the conversations that we have to have is, yes, I know you've built for 3 HPS participants. We believe it's only appropriate for 2. And conditioning developers back to say, if we can put 2 in for 10 years each, that's got to be better than putting 3 in for 12 months and then realising they can't, it's too small or whatever. Let's get it right and save you money by minimising vacancies where we can, by getting people as happy and comfortable in their own home as possible, and that's by moving it to the right level. So if you want to have 3 people living together, 3 participants living together, think about a second living area, because you're all in there watching TV. Someone's visitors come over. The last thing you want is you can't watch the last quarter of the grand final because someone's visitors have come over. Put a second living area. They can go and have afternoon tea up the front, or like you would like mainstream people would in their own homes. It's you've got 3 people from different families, under the same roof. Give them some space to actually live their lives the way they'd like to, without encroaching on each other. Yeah.
So a 3-bed HPS with 2 living areas, then the footprint of that house is starting to get, 320 to 350 square metres, isn't it? It was really starting to build a really big house.
We're talking 4-bedroom, basically 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 2 living area. That's correct.
Yeah.
So maybe you think about doing your 2 participant plus OOA.
Yeah.
2 and 2. We'd still like you to have a second space, breakouts, but not a second, living area or somewhere to get away from there. But it's again, it's going to come back to mainstream fundamentals. If you have your kids, when Freddie grows up a bit, Neil, you're going to want to make sure he's got the rumpus room to go to when he and his little mates are tearing around, and you want to have an adult conversation up the other end of the house. It's no different for people with disability.
Yeah, true. Alison, you touched on fire sprinklers there.
Yes.
So fire sprinklers generally fall into Class 3 classification in the Building Design Code. In Western Australia, there's been a little bit of confusion. I'm not sure whether this is the same in different states, whether we're building a Class 1B, whether we're building a Class 3, whether fire sprinklers are in or fire sprinklers are out. There's rumours that it could be getting mandated as well, so it becomes a requirement in these properties. Have you got any more information around what is right and what is wrong and what's coming?
I don't have any information around what's coming. I know what I'd love to see, which is sprinklers mandated. I'm certainly not a building surveyor. I'm not a building surveyor. I'm no expert on the National Construction Code or your different classes, etc. I do spend a lot of time talking to organisations that operate in these houses.
Yep.
And talking to families who put people whose health is marginalised put family members into these dwellings to live safely. If a fire breaks out, sometimes on some of these sites that are built on, things with blocks with a 10-metre frontage, there's no way known we can get a wheelchair down either side of those houses or get someone out safely. You want the people in there to have the best chance of survival possible, and that is to put the fire out via the sprinklers. So I have people say to me, but we've got opening doors out to each fence, or we've got this, or we've got that. And I'm going, yes, and I can touch that fence from where I'm standing. So bring it back to yourself and think about, do you want to wake up and be the developer who's on the front page of the paper because you didn't put sprinklers in and we've had a massive tragedy overnight? I then have people come in here and say, I don't have to put sprinklers in, and we're only building for IL and robust participants, and so they can all get themselves out because they're mobile. And then I have a carer come in and say, yes, but what if Joey, and quite often Joey, who is in an IL participant, may well be non-verbal. So when you're yelling out, Joey, the house is on fire, come to me, we need to get out, and Joey doesn't answer, Joey's just at risk as someone who can't get out of bed themselves. So across all categories, I would encourage you as strongly as I can to really have a look at the fire mitigation piece and sprinklers and be putting them in there where you can, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's talk about property management, Alison. Are you Australia-wide, or are you moving Australia-wide?
Yeah, we're Australia-wide, Neil. So you've got me not at my sparkiest today, because I think we got home about 1:30 this morning from Darwin. So that's our first foray up into the Northern Territory.
Yeah.
But we manage Queensland, stock in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. We've got stuff under construction in Tassie. We're in discussions with South Australia. We've got stock underway in Western Australia. And now we've done Darwin. So, and we're not in the ACT, but I'm sure that's a matter of time. So, yeah, and we set INHAB Australia up to be the leading bespoke SDA provider. It's different to mainstream property management because you've got all the Quality and Safeguards Commission pieces to meet. You've got people who sometimes we may be the only other provider other than the SIL provider into the house. So it's really important that our property management piece isn't just about is the oven working, but it's also about how happy are you in this environment and is there anything else we can do? So it's a higher touch than mainstream property management. It's a really rewarding space and we really enjoy it. We're seeing a lot of CHPs. There's not a lot of private bespoke property managers set up in this space yet. There's probably 2 or 3 main competitors that we have. But our main competition probably comes from community housing providers. Does social housing equate with disability housing? I don't believe so. Not now that the NDIS has come into play. And are some of those organisations really well set up to do both? I don't know. Time will tell. So, yeah.
Are you seeing any developers offer any incentives to secure tenancy in their properties, like being creative with furniture packs or anything that they can do to make their space more appealing or their accommodation more appealing for the participants?
We always talk our developers through a white goods pack of washing machine, dryer, dishwasher, obviously. We try and encourage a microwave, and we do all we can to encourage a fridge as well. Some property developers will include perhaps an allowance for a furniture selection, or they may actually provide it themselves, or they also might amortise it. So someone might give someone a $12,000 pack and just take an extra $1,000 a month as they do a easy buy or something, or easy pay, or whatever we call it these days. A labour like that. It's again, you've got to think about where your participant's coming from. Know your participant first is probably my strongest recommendation to you. And yes, it's really sad. Some people who come out of hospital or residential aged care have literally nothing. So
it's pretty sad, isn't it?
It's hard. If you're looking at, you're doing your numbers across the 20-year investment horizon. The furniture pack in there to enable someone to come in there and live comfortably is probably not a big ask for you.
Yeah.
Is as far as whether we do that we certainly don't do that to entice participants.
Yeah.
We would put it as an offer.
Yeah. Okay.
Would they like to take that up? Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. I've noticed in the some of the pricing guideline, I've seen a thing called RRC.
Okay. Yes.
Can you explain what that is, please?
Yes, formerly known as RRC. It's now known as MRRC.
MRRC, right.
So that had an iteration change in a price guide. which it stands for the maximum reasonable rental contribution. So when you build an SDA property, Neil, and enrol it with the NDIA, there are two line items of income that you will receive. So one is the SDA funding, which comes directly from the participants plan because you've provided those bricks and mortar as a support. The federal government of Australia has always said that housing is the responsibility of the individual. So you also have a responsibility to commit to paying for the roof over your own head. In SDA, it's no different. It is known as the MRRC. So if you're living in, if you're a tenant in an SDA house, the landlord can also charge you a rental, which is what the MRRC, so the maximum reasonable rental contribution. Because it's attracting the SDA funding, they've capped the amount that the landlord can charge the tenant for the MRRC, and it's capped at 25% of the disability support pension or its equivalent, as well as any Commonwealth rent assistance, which may be paid through to the participant through the welfare system. So we can't charge, landlords can't charge any more than the equivalent of 25% of the disability support pension as rental, but landlords do have the right to charge that rental, and a participant does have an obligation to pay if that's forced upon them, because they need to commit to their own roof over their head. Now, at the moment, the magic number is about $10,900 a year, so just about $800 a month.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
What I am noticing as well is the NDIS is just littered with acronyms.
Absolutely.
It's hard to keep up on them, so thank you for sharing that one with us.
That's okay.
What a lot of other people ask me as well, and this is probably, as we're wrapping this up now, is there a danger of oversaturation of too much SDA housing on the market?
I come back to the mainstream fundamentals. In the western suburbs of Melbourne, absolutely. Absolutely, because people have built to a low price point, the lowest common denominator, small yards, fire sprinklers aren't mandatory, so we won't put them in. Every shortcut, etc., that can be taken has been. There's a lot of competition out there now. And Layla Burnett, my friend and colleague, who's the property valuer, she talks about a two-tier market now developing out there. The stuff that will have a really limited lifespan versus the stuff that's built appropriately that will have the full 20-year horizon. Is there going to be an oversaturation for well-located, well-built stock? I think the supply and demand, as I said, will mimic mainstream. So anything that's well-located, if you've got an outlook over Brighton Beach in Melbourne, you're probably always going to pretty much have a line of tenants waiting to move into that. So, yeah, no, is this oversaturation? I would be seriously looking at those numbers where we talked about over 52% are probably IL or robust. I think if you look at what's being enrolled, you'll probably find over 70% is HPS. So again, I'd say to you developers, stand back, do some sensitivity analysis around being prepared to accept any of the three levels of funding, ILFA or HPS, in your accommodation, or robust if you've built to the robust specifications. But don't always be hanging your hat on that, where that price point raced to at the very start of it. Take the long-term approach over it. Look at a reasonable return over your 20-year horizon and do your sensitivity analysis. And it's still better than mainstream returns.
Yes, absolutely. And just lastly, there, with IL being 52% of the market and we're building 70% of HPS stock, do you see that as a risk, or do you see that as risk mitigation because we're building to the higher support standard, which means we can then house ILs and FAs?
I see it as risk. For my clients, it's risk mitigation. So cutting to the chase, Neil, if we're providing you with advice out of INHAB, we talk to you about building either robust or high physical support, but running your numbers for high physical support on a mix of the three categories. So the fact that it's being enrolled up there I don't see as the problem. It's the fact that everyone expects their income to be up there as well.
Yeah.
So it's managing those expectations, which, yeah. So that's we have the tough discussion with the developers up front, and then come out and they all go, you're only going to be able to put 30% of these participants are going to have to be IL, Alison. And I go, actually, you've got a view over the beach in Mornington. I think we'll do a little bit better than I think we'll be able to get more HPS and FA participants in there than what we originally boxed you around the years about, to get you to think seriously about what you're doing and why you're in it. Like, please don't just be in it for the return, be in it for the housing the participant. If you can get that right for the participant, the money follows, the return follows. And that's what I love about working in the space. There's enough on the table for everybody. Get the right result for the participant and the funds take care of themselves.
And yeah, it comes back to build the best product, doesn't it? Build a better product than what's required.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
To minimise vacancy, encourage longevity of tenant in there. It's a great story. Move somebody in who's fully accessible, and then if something happens with their health and they become HPS, if you've built to HPS, we can go and retrofit the hoist, etc. That's that person's home for life. You're not losing. Developers aren't losing because the vacancy risk's minimised, because that person doesn't have to move out and we don't have to find someone else. That's a beautiful story to someone. This is your home for life. As your needs increase, we can increase with you.
Yes. And how good does it feel, Alison? What's the feeling like when you're moving people out of accommodation that's unsuitable for them currently, but moving them into, brand new SDA accommodation?
It's just the best feeling that it's really hard to explain, Neil, but for someone like me who has always been profit and loss and balance sheet driven in corporate Australia all my career, to be working in this space where you're doing the right thing, you're making such a change in someone's life, they're being housed safely. And I think one of the first ladies who everyone said she was grumpy, and her name just happened to be Alison, and everyone said she was grumpy and she was this and she was that and blah, blah, blah. And she was delightful with us. And one of the carers said, once we moved her in, they couldn't believe the change in her. And there was a tear in my eye. For the first time in her life, she was actually at the kitchen bench in her wheelchair chopping the vegetables for her dinner. She hadn't been able to do that anywhere else she'd lived. And then the carers are saying to me, they went into her the other day and she goes, I'll put the kettle on and I'll get the cake out that Marg and I made this morning. We can have some of that. Now, she's a woman who's sort of my age who'd never been able to do any of that normal domestic stuff we take for granted. So you can't put a price on that, but the feeling, the tingly feeling, sensational.
Give me goosebumps. I can see you get excited as well as you begin to tell that story.
I love it. I just love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. More stories like that.
Yeah. Alison, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There was so many things I could have kept talking about there. Maybe we'll catch up again in the future and do it again.
That'd be great. Really appreciate it, and always happy to talk, Neil.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.